it's great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for joining us. I want to get your take on this White House climate event happening. There's so much going on in terms of spending and taxes. Tell me about the White House event and why Xi Jinping is one of the featured speakers.
Well, I can't opine as to why he's one of the featured speakers, other than, they're the world's leading polluter in terms of emissions of carbon. And that's even as they appear at the summit, they're funding billions of dollars of fossil fuel powered plants all over the world, including within China. Their emissions continue to climb. And that's why I always tell people that U.S. action alone is irrelevant when you have countries like China who continue to increase their emissions. And they're not going to stop doing that. So if you look at words versus actions, I think Xi Jinping is more than happy to see us adopt policies that would increase the costs of growing our economy. But I don't think you're going to see them do anything that's going to slow down their ability to grow. And you're not going to see them do anything that will stop funding this sort of activity all over the world, where they now control these power plants. It gives them geopolitical leverage, too.
I mean, it's pretty extraordinary that the CCP has broken so many promises. They were supposed to leave Hong Kong autonomous, and now we see the Chinese police on the ground with their goose steps in Hong Kong. It's a chilling sight. They've broken promises on intellectual property theft, on bullying their neighbors in the South China Sea. Why do we expect that they're not going to break promises on the climate? And we're knowing that China is the biggest polluter in the world, as you just said.
Yeah, it's wishful thinking. It's the fact that every 4 to 8 years we transition from one administration to the next. They don't have those kinds of transitions. They've got a steady plan that they stick to. And you mentioned the South China Sea. They promised not to militarize it. They said, we're never going to militarize it. It's fully militarized. There really is no deal that they've ever signed on to, any agreement they've ever signed on to that they fully complied with. And it's a moving scale. And what they count on is that in Western countries and in democracies, leaders change every number of years. And so the new leaders will forget about the deals made with the old leaders or won't make it a priority. I think that's what they take advantage of. And I think they'll do the same with the climate.
Well, what about China and corporate America? What's going on here, Senator? I mean, look, we all know what just took place in Georgia, where a handful of companies, including the Major League Baseball, attacked Georgia, and yet they're perfectly fine working with communist China. Did they not read the bill in Georgia? What's your take on how this is happening and why these companies are getting bullied? Is the CCP also behind this?
Yeah, and to some extent. Look, first of all, let me be clear. I don't want us to not be a free country. These companies have a right to believe and say whatever they want to say, but we have a right to point out the hypocrisy. I think if you're going to stand for human rights, if you're going to stand for voting rights, if you're going to stand for all these things, then you've got to be consistent about it. And I think what's happening here is very simple. It's about money. It's about the billions of dollars that they make from access to the Chinese market in some way, shape, or form. And so what happens is the price of having access to that market is their silence. Look, if you speak out against something the Chinese Communist Party is doing, they'll kick you out of the country, and you'll become a target of all sorts of things. Look at it's not an American company, but H&M as an example is a company that dared to speak out against the cotton that's coming from forced labor in Xinjiang, and they've been the target of boycotts. They're going to get run out of the country. It's also why we have American companies who are Nike and others who are here in Washington lobbying against our Uyghur forced labor bill. They don't do it openly, but they're doing it. Everybody knows they're doing it because they are profiting from their business arrangement. And part of that business arrangement, whether it's the NBA or Major League Baseball or some airline, part of the business arrangement with China is you can't say anything. And that's hypocrisy, and that needs to be pointed out.
Well, I mean, it's not being pointed out, though. I mean, look, we're not even allowed now to say the Wuhan virus or the China virus, even though we all know that the coronavirus originated in Wuhan. Are we going to see a change in U.S. policy? Joe Biden has still not brought up the coronavirus to Xi Jinping. And now we have him as one of the featured speakers at this White House event, even knowing that it's all BS. They're not going to keep any climate promises. And yet we have not asked Xi Jinping where the coronavirus originated from. Do you find that odd?
Well, I don't know what they're going to talk about privately, but I can tell you that no one knows exactly how this originated, and that's the problem. The fact that the Chinese Communist Party was not transparent from the very beginning, you could say has led to the death and the suffering and the economic calamity all over the world. And to this day, we had an open hearing last week, and I asked the director of national intelligence. She admitted right there in front of everybody that we still do not know. I mean, the sort of conventional theory out there is this is a zoonotic infection that went from an animal to a human and then into the general population. But that, in fact, has not been established. And I think an equally likely scenario is one in which there was an accident in a laboratory. That accident led to someone in there being infected, and that person took it out into the population, and it spread all over the world. And the Chinese Communist Party has not been transparent about that, and has been, if that's the case, has been covering it up. And you saw that how they interfered with the World Health Organization's recent investigation there as well. And so that's a big problem, because had we known about it earlier, and had we known more details about its genetic makeup and the like earlier, we would have had a vaccine, and we would have been able to respond a lot quicker. And I think there would be people alive today and a lot less economic suffering.
Well, my point is I don't know why we're not raising this with the Chinese Communist Party. This is just off limits. The conversation is off limits. Let me turn to the crisis at the border. As you have seen up close and personal, the number of unaccompanied migrant children arriving in the U.S. jumping more than 800% from January to March of this year, according to UNICEF. This report also shows 275 minors on average are entering the country every day. Again, a crisis created by bad policy, Senator. The first week in office, Joe Biden came in and reversed remain in Mexico, reinstituted catch and release, and stopped all construction of the border wall. Have you heard from the president or the vice president about their plans to change this crisis? Fix it?
No, I haven't. I don't think anyone has, frankly. They haven't even acknowledged that it was a crisis. They denied that it was a crisis. And for many weeks went around saying it was nothing more than the seasonal uptick in normal migration. This migration is a direct product of incentives that were put in place by policy decisions made in the early days of the Biden administration, and frankly, as part of his campaign rhetoric. So you have people in the Northern Triangle countries, in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, who now think and believe rightfully that if they get to the U.S. with children in particular, they're going to be allowed to stay pending a hearing. And this is a terrible calamity, because what's being missed here is that part of the network that's trafficking human beings to and across the border are linked to these drug cartels. So we have incentivized these poor people who are desperate, and in essence turned them over into the hands of these horrible trafficking networks, these criminals. And you have instances already of migrants dying during that journey. They're charging thousands of dollars to begin with. It's just a terrible calamity, and it's 100% predictable, because it was completely due to the decisions made by this administration.
Yeah, and I was on the phone yesterday with a border official. He told me that he has discovered 69 pounds of fentanyl. That's up 5,000% from a year ago. 49 pounds of heroin, up 4,000%. Hard narcotics coming into this country. They know exactly what to do, the smugglers and the drug cartels. And then, of course, there's Russia. And, Senator, I'm trying to put out all of the issues that we're talking about every day. You've got China circling the wagons of Taiwan, laying down its law in Hong Kong. You've got Russia circling the wagons of Ukraine. You've got Iran and the Iranians digging in, saying, yeah, we're going to continue to enrich uranium. I mean, satellite images obtained by the Wall Street Journal show an increase in Russian fighter jets and other military equipment in Crimea along the Ukraine border. On a call last week with Putin, President Biden called for de-escalation with Ukraine, said he was prepared to take strong action if necessary. What strong action have we taken, and how come no action was taken on China? We know that China has 1 million Uyghurs locked up right now. So, again, it's Russia, 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 and no movement on China.
Well, these are all very serious topics. They're all very different. With Iran, we have an administration that's in negotiations. They desperately want to get back into the Iran deal. The Iranians know that. They're going to ask for the moon, and they're going to ask for reparations. Iran is going to ask for. They're demanding and insisting that that every sanction be eliminated, even the non-nuclear sanctions be eliminated. They consider all of them to be nuclear related. In the case of China, we've got to make firm our commitment to Taiwan. The Chinese need to know that is a defense agreement that we will commit to. We don't want a war, but that's a choice they have to make. But the less risk they see in that, the more likely they are to be aggressive towards Taiwan at some point. And in the case of Ukraine, look, I anticipate that there is going to be some military incursion. I think the likeliest outcome is that Putin will characterize it as a peacekeeping mission to stabilize a place where there's violence, to protect Russian speakers. And it's all about NATO. It's all about keeping Ukraine towards turning to the West. It's the leverage he's creating there. And, this buildup you see is a direct result of it. They've already cut off access to a shipping lane. And in fact, last week, the U.S. decided not to send naval vessels for a NATO exercise in that region in order not to provoke the Russians. I would point out that if Trump had made that decision, he would be called, Putin's friend, who would have a very different response to that. The point being, look, these are all very delicate issues. I don't take lightly. We're not going to send American soldiers into Ukraine to fight a war, but there are things we could be doing to provide them what they need now from a defensive capability. To raise the cost of that sort of incursion. But I think it's quite likely that you'll see Putin move in at some point. Even in a limited incursion, he'll call a peacekeeping mission or something.
Well, that's very dangerous. And what I'm saying is the rest of the world appears to be viewing America as weak. Look at all of this movement now, 100 days into a new administration. And then there's domestic policy, Senator. I mean, you and your colleagues right now are debating all of this new information on higher taxes as well as massive spending. Joe Biden said he wants to unify, and yet he's done everything by one-party rule, whether it be executive orders, changing things at the border, or getting through reconciliation. Are we going to see higher individual tax rates, and are they going to be able to get that through reconciliation? They don't need your vote.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I mean, and they could, if that's the route they decide to take, and they may, and that's unfortunate for the economy and for the country at a time in which it needs to begin to recover. You're going to impose new, ultimately, the people who are going to pay the biggest price for that are going to be those states that have high state income taxes. Because as we already saw from the first tax reform, when these states with high tax burdens at the state level, they're migrating away to places like Florida that don't have a state income tax. But I think they very well could move on that unless a couple Democrats stand up and say, we don't want higher taxes.